You are listening to the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management topics to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at pmpodcast.blogspot.com or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com. Hello and welcome to show number 28. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast for the 15th of April 2006. Last week, I announced that from now on, shows will be shorter. Except that if I have an interview. And this week, we have exactly that. A whopper of a show, and I'm excited to announce today's interview with Frank Parth. But first, let's start with the announcements and the helpful resources. My first announcement is an apology to all those among you who download my shows manually every week. Most of you actually use some kind of a software, iTunes, iPodder, Doppler, you name it, to automatically download the show every week without you having to do anything. But there are those out there who do this manually. They go to the blog, they click on the link, they download it, or listen on the computer directly through speakers. And for all of you out there, I had an option that you could sign up for a reminder email. Well, unfortunately, the service that I have used to send out this reminder email has suddenly become quite expensive. And I have decided to discontinue that particular reminder email. Well, for now at least. When I come across another new service, a good service, one that is safe, secure, and doesn't keep sending you spam all the time, then I will announce that again. However, I have in the meantime also put up a page that shows all past episodes on one long page. So if you have missed the show in the past, go to the blog, pmpodcast.blogspot.com, and look for a link that says List of All Episodes on the left-hand side. And using that link, you can find and download every single show that I have produced so far. Today's episode of the Project Management Podcast is sponsored by Entiplicity Project Management Solutions. Project management is not just about the software. Whether you are a small operation or a large corporation, value-added project management must be based on flexible technology, solid processes, and strategic thinking. Learn more about Entiplicity's flexible, web-based technology, project management education, and strategic consulting. Visit www.weneedpm.com. Next, we have the book giveaway. Yes, we're still in the middle of giving away 2 copies of Jerry Manus' book, Napoleon on Project Management. And once again, here's what Bud Belanich, the common sense guy, had to say about the book. Napoleon on Project Management dispenses common sense advice on not only project management but leadership. It lives up to its subtitle, Timeless Lessons in Planning, Execution and Leadership. And if you want to win one of these 2 copies, all you have to do is send me an email, and in the subject line of the email, write the word Napoleon, and in the body of the email, your name and where you are writing from. Your email has to reach me by Wednesday, April the 18th, and you may win one of those. This week I have 3 helpful resources, 4 seminars, and 2 project management news for it. So let's get going here very quickly. The resources, they're actually not mine. They have been suggested to me by B. Sai Prasad. Sorry if I completely mispronounced your name just now. He's a PMP. He's from Chennai in India. The first one is a toolkit from ittoolkit.com, and they provide a set of free quick tools for all major activities in a project. And this is really a whopper of a link here if you go to that. They have downloadable PDF templates for initiation, planning, staffing, execution, controlling, best practices, and strategic planning. And in each of those categories, there are about 4 or 5 at least list with each of them. So quite nice, quite useful for all of us project managers out there who don't really have a prefabricated project management methodology in your company. The second helpful resource is from Entiplicity. Yes, our sponsor of today's episode. And they provide a free white paper. And it's entitled 10.5 Ways to Improve Your Project Team. Sai writes about this that I liked each one of them, each 10.5 of these ways. It's a quick read and it gives you good and immediately useful tips, well, on how to improve your project team. The third of Sai's helpful resources is from Gantt. You have to register, of course, to be able to read this. It is an article on 6 essential facilitation techniques for project managers. This is almost kind of a follow-up to the interview that I did with Steve Kay a little while ago. And these 6 essential techniques are, first of all, there's gatekeeping, they have flip charting, they talk about brainstorming and clustering. Number 5 is something that they call the T, whatever that means. And number 6, there is the weighted voting. Alright, so if you want to improve your facilitation techniques, stop by and read up on them. Let's move on to the suggested project management events this week. I am concentrating on England, so the 4 events here are for all those listeners in England. The first one is a half-day PMI event in Edinburgh on April the 24th, and they have presentations on project team management and global risk management. It's free for anyone who's a PMI UK member, and anyone else will have to pay £30. The next one is titled Project Management with the British Army. This one simply caught my eye because there are so many facets of project management out there, and yes, of course, the Army has to do project management as well. This particular event is in London. It will be May the 10th, and it's going to be a presentation on engineering work in Afghanistan by Major Brian Smith. Next on the list here is the Business Performance and Project Management Summit. This is also in London on April the 27th and 28th. This is a 2-day seminar at the Heathrow Marriott. And they're going to have presentations, workshops, actually several tracks of workshops, several tracks of presentations, and also various plenary debates. And just a quick rundown here, they're going to be talking about earned value, project turnaround, change management, risk, best practice, case studies, etc., etc. So 2 days full of project management for all you listeners there in London. Finally, I stopped by at the Association for Project Management's website to see if anything is in their calendar. And there was so much I couldn't decide what, so the link that you will find on my website is actually to the APM's calendar of events. And this is going to be all over England. And just so you understand the number of events that they're showing there, just in the week between the 24th and the 28th of April, they're listing 11 events. And if you cannot find anything in these events that you're going to want to be at, well, you're probably on vacation in Jamaica. Alright, we got 2 more to go, 2 more news items to be precise. The first one comes to us from the International Journal of Quality and Reliability Management, because they are planning a special issue on project portfolio management. Seems to be the hot topic this year. So, if you are a project manager who is working in the project portfolio management space, check out this article because they are looking for submissions, and you can send in your submission by July 1st, 2006 and hopefully become a published project manager here. And if you do, let me know and I'll make sure that I will give your article the appropriate coverage here on the show. The second news item I have for you comes from down under, from the Australian Institute of Project Management. They are calling for a major rethink on project management to avoid skills shortage. Well, in a nutshell, what they're saying is that in Australia, the older generation of project managers will soon begin to take their retirement, and the younger ones aren't really ready to step up to the plate yet. So they are pushing the idea that we have to train our young project managers and we have to get them to know the right skills in project management. This is a very forward-thinking approach, in my opinion, from the AIPM to look at the issues that they have with retirement coming up throughout the whole country. Yeah, and that is the helpful resources, project management events, and project management news for this week. As always, if you want to look at these in detail, stop by at pmpodcast.blogspot.com, where you will find links to every single item that I have read to you so far. And now, here's what you have all been waiting for today. Well, waiting for, that's of course unless you haven't fast-forwarded to this point. And if you have, you've missed a lot of good stuff, so go back to the beginning and listen through everything. So, here's the interview with Frank Parth. Let me tell you a little bit about Frank. Frank's professional career has encompassed extensive experience in technology development, project management, and large-scale systems, as well as team building and organizational design. He has a solid record of accomplishments in designing and implementing complex systems in support of corporate goals. He has an extensive background in building and leading focused cross-functional teams to successful project completion. If you look at the companies that he's worked for, there's a list of really big names. Here's the Smithsonian Institute. He's worked for Toyota Financial Services, Southern California Edison, a large electric company, energy supplier here in the area. And he's also worked for the United Nations International Fund for Agriculture Development in Italy and for Novartis in Basel, Switzerland. So he's been around the block once or twice. Frank is also teaching at the University of California, Irvine, at the Claremont Graduate School, and also at the USC, the University of Southern California. But most importantly, Frank has been involved in building 4 PMOs in his career. And this is why we're talking to Frank today.
The Project Management Podcast Feature Interview. Today with Frank Parth, President of Project Auditors.
Fellow project managers, I am sitting here in the home of Frank Parth in Southern California, Mission Viejo. It is pouring outside, and we're going to try and do an interview about project management offices. Hello, Frank. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Cornelius. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Let's start out with your career. You began your career in aerospace. You were working for Martin Marietta, and today you are the founder, president of Project Auditors. Why don't you give us a brief overview of your career?
Okay, happy to do that. Yeah, I grew up in the aerospace industry. My first job out of graduate school was with Texas Instruments, and I'm convinced they couldn't spell physicist, so they made me an engineer, and I've been doing a lot of engineering work since then. From Texas Instruments, I went on to Martin Marietta, and over a dozen years there, I ended up as the assistant technical director on an Air Force satellite development project. And then when the industry turned down back in the early 90s, I made the decision to leave Martin Marietta and stay here in Southern California instead of relocate to Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. So after taking a little bit of time off to regroup and figure out what I wanted to do, I actually started doing 2 things. I started teaching in the graduate school at the University of Southern California, and I started consulting, mostly to other aerospace engineers at that time.
What did you teach?
I taught systems engineering, systems analysis, and management in the graduate school. And right now, I've continued to teach because I find I really enjoy doing that. And I'm teaching now for UC Irvine. And I still do that on an occasional basis. I do 4 to 6 classes a year, usually. And I also teach for project auditors.
Okay, so what does project auditors do?
Project auditors has basically 3 lines of business. We do project management, of course, particularly in the technology arena, but we have clients in government, financial services, pharmaceuticals, and other industry areas. We also provide project management training as well as business analysis training, and we provide project quality auditing services. One project we finished last year was with the Smithsonian Institution, where we were invited in to do an audit of a PeopleSoft implementation they were doing.
Okay. Now, that was a jump between engineering and then to project auditors. How did you ever go from engineering to project management and then to PMOs? I don't think we touched on that yet.
No, we didn't. I started off as a design engineer, kind of moved from design engineering into systems engineering, which involves putting all the pieces together, and I found I really, really like that. And Texas Instruments did very little systems engineering, but I found Martin Marietta, and that was mostly what they did. So I kind of went from systems engineering from design engineering to systems engineering, and more found myself managing projects.
Okay. Yeah, that explains the
that
switch
was a segue,
over.
the switch,
yes. On your website, you have your CV, and on it I saw that you have been part of the development of several PMOs. Let's see.
Yes.
Toyota Financial Services, Southern California Edison, and Pacific Life. So what we'd like to do today is go through these and see how they stack up against each other, what you did on them, what the projects were like. But let's get started with another question first. Are these all of the ones that you built, or are there any that you didn't mention on the website?
Actually, the first one I built, Cornelius, was for Pacific Gas and Electric up in San Francisco.
Okay.
That was back in 1998 when they were doing Y2K work. Remember that period of time?
Yes.
They had 15 independent Y2K projects going on and no way to coordinate all them at corporate. So we set up a PMO at the corporate level to bring together all their Y2K projects.
Wow. How did you get involved in that? How was it? Were you a consultant at the time?
I was actually doing some work for Deloitte & Touche at that time.
Ah.
And was brought in specifically to do that.
Okay. What kind of challenge was given to you by the management for that particular PMO for Y2K?
It was, we have 15 projects, we don't know what's going on, they're all being run differently, please help us coordinate them. So, and that's not an unusual challenge for PMOs. In fact, that was what brought us into the Toyota financial services also. They had 35 project managers, most of them were consultants, contractors. And there were no project management processes in place, so we took a look at it and said, you really need a PMO to bring all this together. So we got hired to develop one for them. For Southern California Edison, there were different reasons. We did some work for their infrastructure group, which is their internal IT group. And several other business units at Edison already had PMOs or centers of excellence. They had both. And infrastructure found that they really did need one themselves, and it had to be able to coordinate with all the other PMOs. So we came in and we designed theirs and helped them implement it. They implemented it internally, but we had to make sure it was compliant with all the other PMOs and all compatible with all the other PMOs.
Makes sense. And the last one, Pacific Life, then?
Pacific Life was facing some unique challenges. Several years ago, they took corporate IT and split it out, the IT work among all the divisions. Then they realized that their costs were growing hugely, so they decided to reconsolidate IT back into corporate. Well, you can imagine how the divisions reacted to that.
Yes.
They did not like losing having their own IT department.
Of course.
So there were a tremendous number of political challenges there, and the feeling was that a PMO would help coordinate all the projects that were going on in work. Actually, they had so many political problems. They had tried a PMO before, and it had failed and left a bad taste in people's mouths. So we called it a Program Technology Office, a PTO, and not a PMO, because we couldn't say PMO. That was a bad thing to say.
Yes, my company actually has exactly the same fear or trouble at the moment. PMO is a word that has a big stigma attached to it. So even though I work in kind of the PMO of my company, Don't call it that.
Okay.
Don't call it that. Now, out of those four, which one had the biggest challenges, had the biggest troubles in setting it up?
They were all a little bit different.
Okay.
Toyota had its own set of challenges and issues. At the executive level and very high up in management, they were fully supportive of the PMO. They could see the benefits
At
to
Toyota.
it. At
Okay.
Toyota, yes. The project managers were a little bit more leery. They thought we were going to take away some of how their freedom and independence and all that, so we had to bring them over into our side. The interesting challenges, Cornelius, were at the middle management level, because there were 3 or 4 middle managers that just saw themselves losing a lot of authority and responsibility.
Now, how did
with
you
the
bring them
PMO.
in?
Well, that was quite a challenge. It was a lot of hand-holding. It was
Yes.
a lot of meetings. It was, let me explain how this is really going to benefit you. The PMO at Toyota, the project managers kept reporting to the functional managers,
Okay.
unlike the PMO at Pacific Life, where all the project managers reported to me in the PMO.
All right.
So we had to convince those middle managers at Toyota that no, they weren't going to lose anything. What we were going to do was provide consistency to them.
Yes, yes.
And that was somewhat challenging.
Okay, where was the challenge? I mean, to me, okay, maybe it's because I understand PMOs. To me, it makes sense. Where was the hiccup with the middle managers? What was the hurdle they needed to jump over?
So often what I found is that the hurdles are not rational, they're emotional.
Ah.
They have heard of PMOs. They had this fear that we were going to take all their people away from them or take away any of their responsibility. And we had to work with them more at an emotional level. Instead of saying, oh, here's what the PMO is, here's what our roles and responsibilities are, isn't it obvious? We couldn't do that because people don't respond to
Right.
that.
Now let's try and stick with the Toyota PMO for a little while. How many people were involved in your team to set up this central PMO, which doesn't have project managers reporting to it?
I had 5 people setting up the PMO,
right.
3 of them contractors, 2 of them were employees.
All right.
And Toyota has a very high percentage of contractors.
Yes, I know that.
That's
quite normal.
For Japanese companies. And so they were the ones helping me design the PMO and implement it. In my experience, designing a PMO is fairly straightforward. Once the executives and the project managers tell me what the goals are of the PMO, because we really have 2 different
Right.
users there, then it's a simple matter of structuring it and finding the right processes to make the PMO successful. What is much more difficult than designing it is implementing it.
Yes.
Because everybody has to buy into it.
Organizational change and all.
Organizational change, all those things you've heard about organizational change are critical to implementing a PMO. We were doing some work right now with a company back in Boston to build up their project management processes. And when I was negotiating the contract and the proposal, I said, I'd be very happy to come in and send somebody in here for the next 6 to 12 months living with you and implementing all this. I said, but that wouldn't get your buy-in from all the other people in the company.
Yes.
I said, you have to do this themselves and we'll support as necessary, but it has to come from internally. It needs a high-level project sponsor, somebody with real authority in the organization, and people have to get involved. They have to design their own changes. Otherwise, it's just too difficult for them to accept some outsider coming in and saying,
Yes.
you're going to change this.
Yeah. If you had to make a guess, how long did the design phase take? And how long did the implementation phase take, kind of to get a feel for this?
The design, once you do a little bit of analysis and understand what all is required, can take 4 to 6 weeks.
All right.
It goes fairly quickly. Implementation can take a year. Mary Sunday at Computer Sciences Corporation has done some PMOs within CSC, and she says that in her experience, PMOs are effective after about 3 years,
Yes.
and they're cost efficient after about 5. By
Wow.
the time everybody has really bought into this is the way we need to do things, and it really does become cost effective.
So big takeaway here for the listeners, PMOs take a long time to
Yes.
implement and take a long time to be cost effective.
Yes.
All right.
Now, there are some vendors that will try and sell you what I call a PMO in a box.
Yes, I actually saw a training class that's currently being offered, ramp up PMO in 30 days, something like that. And I was looking at it and I'm thinking, that can't be.
And it's not.
No.
It can't be effective. because it takes much longer than that to get people to really fully buy into what you're doing
Yes.
and the changes that are being made.
Yes. Now, was the corporate culture at Toyota ready for a PMO?
I believe it was, yes. Upper management was certainly behind it, and that's critical
Yes.
to getting buy-in and success in the organization. At Pacific Life, they had such management problems. I don't believe it was really ready for a PMO. And Edison, they were ready for it. Management told me they were ready for it. When I said, okay, you need somebody to manage this as a project. You need 3 or 4 people full-time on it to
Yes.
design the processes, build the templates, coordinate with all the other organizations, figure out, how the interfaces work. And they said, yes, absolutely, we understand that. And a week after I left, they have started pulling people out of the PMO to go work on other things at the same time.
So the PMO probably doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, it does exist. I
On
don't
paper?
No, it does exist. There are still people in there. I don't believe it's as effective as it could have been.
Okay. What about the one at Toyota then?
It is still going strong there.
Still going strong.
Yes.
Now, how many people work in the PMO today at Toyota? Do you know?
I think it's 3 full-time.
3
based
full-time.
on my understanding,
and
yes.
if I understand it correctly, they are just in charge of the project management methodology, support, PM training, oversight of projects, all those good things.
Oversight of the project managers
Yes.
in terms of that, yes. They also have one person that's working. They brought in an enterprise-wide project management tool called Niku.
Yes, heard of
And
it.
They have one person maintaining that and making sure that everything is input properly and
Okay.
all that. So,
Yeah.
yes.
So let's jump over to Edison. Did
Okay.
they have any project management tools that they put in, like Niku?
Edison, first of all, they brought in their own project manager. They had their own project management tool.
Okay.
And that was kind of clumsy and awkward, so they put in PlanView just about, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, and they're using that now throughout many parts of Edison. And that's basically a web-based tool that's a resource management tool. It's not a critical path tool. It's a resource management tool. So you put all your tasks in there and all your resources, and it does all the deconfliction for you. So, and they are actively using that.
All right. And since they've pulled people out of the PMO, how many people do you think are currently working in that PMO?
I don't know. I'd have to go find out. But they have a number of PMOs. They now have an enterprise level PMO that coordinates a lot.
Yes.
And they take PMO seriously there at Southern California Edison.
Okay. Now, didn't you mention that they weren't organizationally ready yet? Did I misunderstand that?
No, they said they were, but management kind of ignored what I said needed to be done. And
Okay. So management was behind it, but the organization wasn't yet ready.
That's one way of looking at it.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. So how did you overcome this cultural shock that people probably went through?
Well, I had to rebuild the timeline.
Ah,
I say, okay, it's now going to take you, 18 months instead of 9 months
Okay.
that we were planning. So
and they bought that.
they bought into it, yes.
Okay, all right. Now, what was the pushback that you got at Edison from the project managers?
Actually, I got no pushback from the project managers at Edison. They were already used to doing some project
Okay.
management processes. And several of them, there's a number of them that are in Orange County PMI chapter, J.C.
Yes.
Marino, for example,
Yes.
And they understand project management processes.
Yes.
And they were fully behind it.
Okay. So what kind of an approach did you then choose to put in the PMO at Edison where obviously the company wasn't ready for it yet?
Implementing the PMO, the specific implementation approach, really depends more than anything else on, as you put it, how ready the company is.
Yes.
There's what I call the Big Bang approach. Here it is, everybody start using it now.
Yeah.
And I've seen that fail time after time. One approach, and this is the one we successfully used at Toyota, was here is a piece of the methodology, and we chose change management. Trained all 35 project managers in change management, gave them a form, told them how to set up a change control board, and said, okay, now you guys start using change management.
Yes.
And I was actually on several CCBs as they started setting it up. And then 6 months later, we wrote out another piece of the methodology, and after that, another one. So over a period of time, you slowly build up the entire methodology from the PMO. You're just doing it slowly so that people can buy into it just one piece at a time,
Right.
and it's not overwhelming change.
Right.
Another approach, and this is one that I've seen used, I haven't tried it myself, but it looks like it's very effective, is to take the entire methodology, everything from writing the project charter to the kickoff meeting to all the planning processes to all the management and change control and all that, and finding the next project in line, taking that project manager and the project team, training them in the new processes, and they use all the methodology but only on one project.
Okay.
And then as new projects come in, you train those people, and eventually as the old projects finish, you have all the projects being run on the whole methodology
Yes.
now.
Hopefully.
And hopefully,
Yeah.
yes. And that seems to work
Very,
well.
very interesting way of implementing it. I don't think
Yes.
I've heard of that. But it makes a lot of sense.
It makes
a lot of sense. Now, one thing that we talked about is success of PMOs. How did you measure at the end whether or not a PMO was successful? As a consultant, it's probably I get paid, so it's successful, but
Well, I always get paid. If the client is happy, they'll invite me back, and that's my measure of success. Cornelius, that's a question that should be easier to answer than it actually is.
Yes.
And the reason is because I can define the metrics and measure the metrics after we've put the PMO in. Mm-hmm. But in order to find out whether we're now better or worse or the same as we were before the PMO went in, I need some before metrics also.
that's true.
And companies don't want to spend 6 months gathering metrics before they actually start something. They just said, go ahead and start it.
So in all 4 cases, you couldn't do a before-after analysis.
Right. Because we didn't have the before.
Okay. So everything is, what's the word again here? Anecdotal.
Exactly. But talking to management, they were generally very, very happy with what they were seeing. So yeah, I would love to be asked 6 months ahead of time to put in a PMO, but let's gather metrics first.
Yeah. So both at Toyota and at Southern California Edison, you had the upper level management support. What about the other 2?
Pacific Life, we had support in corporate. We had some support in corporate, but the divisions were strongly against it.
Okay.
Because, as I say, they saw themselves losing control over
Yes,
their own
over
IT
the IT
resources.
department.
So
Yes.
there were huge political challenges there. At Pacific Gas and Electric is a very top-down, almost a military-style management culture. You will do this, no questions asked. So when upper management said, we're going to have a PMO, you're going to report to it, there were no questions asked.
All right. So it sounds like Pacific Life was the greater challenge then out of the 2.
Yes.
Let's look at that for a moment. Since the divisions had so much pushback to give, how did you address that? How did you in the end convince them that this is the right way to go? Or did you not convince them?
For the period of time I was there, we were in the process of convincing them.
All right.
What we had to do was, first of all, we had to limit the projects we did in corporate IT to ones that were common to all of them, rather than unique to any one division. And then we had to have monthly strategic meetings to get all the CIOs together and get them to vote on what needed to be voted on. And a lot of it was how expenditures were going to be calculated, because they were all paying into a pool based on the size of their division. And of course the bigger divisions paid in more, so they had more say-so about what projects got done, which made the smaller divisions very unhappy. So there were a lot of those kinds of challenges we had to work through.
A lot of political maneuvering.
Tremendous political maneuvering, and it was to the point where there was a lot of personal animosity from one CIO to another.
Right.
So what we had to do was, I had somebody whose almost full-time job it was to go around to each of the divisions, sit down with the CIO and say, here's the meeting we're going to have next week, here's what we're going to discuss, here's what we think we need the vote to be. How do you feel about it? Do you have any feedback? So we did a lot of hand-holding with each one of the CIOs just to make the meeting itself run smoothly. But it was tremendously challenging.
That proves once again that 90% of what project managers do is communicating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very interesting, very interesting. Now, how long did that particular process take at Pacific Life to setting up this central PMO?
I was there, I want to say 5 or 6 months. It was a longer, ongoing process.
Oh, you came in for a particular task
I came in
then?
for a particular, the initial setup of
Okay.
the PMO, yes.
And what was your position?
I headed up the PMO.
Oh, you headed up the PMO. You were
Yes.
you led the PMO.
I led the PMO.
So you
yes.
were a
So
full-time employee at that time.
designing it and leading it, and I had the project
Okay.
managers and some business analysts
All right.
reporting to me.
Now let's go back to the organizational structure of that particular PMO. So it was a central PMO, IT PMO, if I
It was
understood
purely
correctly.
an IT PMO, yes.
And was the plan to have the project managers report to the director of the PMO?
Yes, that was the
okay.
plan all
so
along,
take
yes.
everybody out of their divisions, everybody comes into the PMO.
No, only the project managers that were in corporate IT reported to the PMO.
So the divisional project managers
They
would stay in the
stayed where they were,
divisions?
yes. Actually, one of the divisions, the Life division, had one of the better PMOs that I've seen, and I wasn't involved in it.
Yes.
They had about 250 people in the PMO, and they did not just IT projects; they did all the projects for the Life division. So it seemed to be quite a successful PMO.
You actually took some of their responsibility away then by moving it from that good PMO into the corporate IT PMO.
Actually, very little of it.
Oh, okay.
So again, the only projects we took in at the corporate PMO were ones that were common to all the different divisions. Now that was still, they were so badly organized that they had no clue how many projects they had. So the first thing we did was a survey, and we found that there were over 100 projects either being worked on or in queue waiting to be worked on. Then we also found out they had no idea what their people were working on in terms of how were people spending their time. So we built a little program so that people on a weekly basis could just enter their time, either working on projects or doing maintenance work or doing whatever. There were like 4 simple categories. And we collected a couple of months worth of data so they could at least see what time was available for working on IT projects.
Right. Okay. Now let's go to the last one. Pacific Electric and Gas, was that the name?
Pacific Gas and Electric.
Pacific
that was
Gas
the very
and Electric.
first one, yeah.
Yes. What was the challenge there? What did you come in for?
I came in because this was, again, back in the Y2K period
Yes.
where they had 15 different projects going on throughout PG&E up in Oregon and Northern California. They were dependent totally on each individual project manager telling them how good the projects were, and there was no commonality in the reporting. So they couldn't take 2 projects and say, this one is in good shape, this one's in trouble, because there were no common metrics. So we set up some metrics for them. Also, a major part of the effort up there was because of all the threatened litigation if you didn't do Y2K correctly, especially for a utility company.
Yes.
We worked very closely with both the legal department and corporate communications. Every message that was sent out, whether it was a news flash, the answering machine messages in our group, or the flyers that went out with your monthly bills, said exactly the same thing. So we couldn't just send out a communication saying, here's what we're doing. We had to get it through the communications department first so it showed consistency.
Interesting. There's an additional challenge for you.
That
Yeah.
was, yes. Yeah.
Now, that probably answers my next question already. Upper management support, I suppose you had that completely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about the middle management, the project managers? How was it there?
The project managers, again, because it's such a very
hierarchical. You mentioned that.
organization,
Yes.
the project managers just fell right in line.
Yeah. And the corporate culture was ready for it, even though it's so hierarchical?
The PMO there was so limited to just the Y2K projects that corporate culture said, this is fine. It's not an ongoing operational type thing. So
Now,
we
you
can do
started
this.
that in 1998. I guess the big bang was December 31st, 1999.
Exactly,
Is
yes.
it still being used? Do you know?
My understanding was that it was disbanded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, do they have another corporate level PMO? I don't know the answer to that. I hope they do because
Yes.
it's very beneficial.
You mentioned metrics again here that you set up to compare the individual projects. What type of metrics did you use in that particular PMO?
In that particular PMO, it was each one of the projects, most of which were actually programs.
Okay.
So they had multiple projects underneath them. We said, okay, here's the plan. How are we against the plan?
Yes.
How are we against the budget? Just really
Basic.
project management metrics. For an ongoing PMO, like at Toyota, we set up a different set of metrics.
All right.
And the metrics we set up there were, first of all, every project manager had to report exactly the same things.
Yes.
It's good to be standard that way.
So standard weekly project status reporting?
Status reporting, yeah. Change notices. How many change requests are you getting?
Oh.
One of my favorite metrics is how many change requests you have against requirements. Because if you have too many change requests against requirements, that tells me that your project doesn't have the requirements down, and you have a project that's in danger of being suffering scope creep. Because if you don't have your requirements down, people are going to come in with changes to get what they wanted to start with.
Yes, you need to talk to my customer about that.
Okay, happy to.
Thank you.
Other metrics that we used were part of the PMO at Toyota was portfolio management. And we automated the whole we created and automated the whole portfolio management process. So on a monthly basis, the executive steering committee will get, this is how many projects are on schedule this past month, how many have fallen behind schedule, same thing for budget. How many new projects did we start? How many new projects are we planning on starting? How many did we successfully complete? And so on.
Do you also have some resource management in that? Because how many new projects are we planning to start means you also have to know what your capacity is.
Well, they had no capacity planning beforehand. That was part of what we built into the resource, the planning, portfolio management process. And we did have a guideline. When we set up portfolio management, projects were prioritized.
Yes.
Based on their benefit to the company, the benefit to the employees, how much they cost, how risky they were, and so on. And so at the end of this entire process, we had a rank ordered list of projects that we could present to the executive steering committee and say, okay, here are the highest ranking projects. And it was up to them to choose what they wanted to do. We started projects when resources became available. And one of the guidelines was that once you start a project, you do not stop it, even if a higher priority project gets approved. Because if you start a project, Cornelius, and I know you know this, it's too easy to let it die altogether if you start it and then kill it. Or put it off or defer it or delay it or something like that. It just automatically dies.
Yeah.
So,
did you at all use earned value in any of the PMOs?
have not yet.
You have not yet.
Have not yet, yes.
Now, how about at Edison? Did we just talk about Edison? No, that was Toyota.
Pacific Gas and Toyota we talked about.
So Edison, what were the metrics that you used there for measuring your projects?
Again, it was basically what they did there was, because they're using PlanView as a project management tool, they set metrics up within PlanView so that the tool notifies you if you're more than, it actually makes you red if you're more than 10% over or 10% under. What your plan goals are. So we just we didn't design unique metrics for them. We just used pretty much whatever was available in PlanView.
And did the steering committee actually have the power to kill a project?
Oh, yes.
Did they do it? Have you ever seen it where they've actually killed a project where it wasn't, it's one of the director's pet peeve projects, so even though it's 50% over budget, we have to keep going with it?
Yes. In fact, I saw that at Toyota. We had one project that the sponsor was a very strong senior executive vice president.
Yes.
Very high up in the organization. The project manager was a contractor in their 20s. And she never learned how to say no. So the senior executive kept asking for more and more and more. And when we finally paid attention to the project, it was 3,000% over budget. And they said, okay, it's time to kill this one.
So they finally did kill it.
Yes.
Okay.
They had another project that was killed just as we were starting up the PMO development there. And it was, a vice president wanted to do something on the internet, and I don't remember the exact project, and IT kept saying, yep, we're working on it, yep, we're working on it. And after 18 months of hearing, yes, we're working on it, he asked to see some results. And they had to admit that, well, they started it 18 months ago, but they hadn't done much work on it since then. And at that time, the business target window for the project was pretty much over, so they just...
Business plan was lost.
Everything was gone, yeah.
Now, let's come back to the benefits. You said even though you didn't have any measurements before and after, you still had the anecdotal information. In those 4 PMOs, what was the number one anecdotal benefit that you saw?
There's less stress.
Less stress.
Less stress.
That's interesting.
As you set up processes that people start to follow, you find you get as much or even more work done without working 60 or 80 hours a week.
Yes.
Because processes take away a lot of the problems caused by not following processes. You spend less time firefighting and solving problems. So we find that people are actually happier working within a PMO once they get acclimated to working within a structure. And executives are happy because they're finding that more projects are now being completed.
What type of increase did you see in projects that got completed? Is it like 50%, 25%, or is it? It depends on the PMO, I guess.
It does, and again, without prior metrics, I really can't tell you. But the executives are saying, yeah, that this is working better.
No, this is working better is a success story.
If you don't have time to collect metrics, yes.
Okay. In all those PMOs, when you came in to set those up, did you have a charter?
In none of them did I start off with a charter.
Okay.
For Toyota, I created a charter, and management made some changes to it, and I got everybody on the team involved in writing the charter. So we did actually, before we started officially working on designing the PMO, we did have a charter in place.
You did create a charter.
We did create it, yes.
Please.
And I find that a charter is very, very beneficial in the process of creating it, in getting people involved and saying, this is what our mission is,
Yes.
this is what the scope is,
Yes.
this is what the risk is. There's a tremendous benefit to get everybody moving in the same direction because they're involved in that process.
What I always say is, when you create a PMO, pretend it's a project.
Oh, it has to
do exactly
be a project,
the
yes.
same thing as if you're doing a project. Start with your goals, do an analysis, everything as you learn it when you go through the PMBOK,
You're
right?
exactly right, yes.
Okay. Is that also the approach that you take?
It's the approach I tried to take, yes.
All right. Now, your personal lessons out of these 4 PMOs, what would you say you've learned in setting up these PMOs?
You know, I think I've learned more than anything that every company has its own unique culture.
Right?
And there's no such thing as a cookie cutter PMO. You have to understand the culture, how people interact, how communications works before you can set up an effective PMO within the organization. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I have from that.
Yeah. What is your best practice approach to doing a PMO? Where do you normally go first?
A PMO really has 2 clients. The first is the executive level, because they're the ones who need to make sure that projects are completed successfully and as efficiently as possible. And the project managers are the other client. They're the ones who are going to be living within the PMO, or at least following the processes and methodologies that the PMO provides. First thing I do is to talk to both of those and find out what their expectations are. And sometimes there are conflicts in the expectations. The executive level wants a lot of processes because they've heard the benefits of process. The project managers sometimes just want to be left alone because they don't want to be hamstrung. You know, it's that you're walking on a balancing beam, and you want to make sure you stay and not fall off in one direction or the other.
Templates. We don't need no templates.
Right.
Yes, that's the project manager approach.
Yes.
All right.
So,
if you could do it again, what would you do differently in each of those PMOs? Let's say Toyota. Let's start with Toyota.
what would I do differently at the Toyota PMO? I would spend more time working with middle management and getting them on my side before we started rolling it out. Because by the time we started, the only thing they knew about us was through rumors and hallway conversations. And I would have a more general presentation to them saying, here's what the goal is, here's what our roles and responsibilities are, here's what you should expect out of the PMO, and get them involved also. We knew we had the executive level. We knew we could get the project managers. It was the middle management that we didn't pay as much attention to as we should.
All right. At Southern California Edison, what would you have done differently there?
I've struggled with that one, Cornelius. I don't have any control over what they do with their assets, their people.
Right.
But I I tried to point out as well as I could that if you pull people out of this as a full-time project, then it's simply going to suffer. I don't know. I have to think about that.
All right.
That was a hard one.
Pacific Life.
What would I do differently? Again, in this case, upper management did not really have a clear understanding of what they wanted. They saw a PMO as a solution to all their problems, or PTO, excuse me, since we couldn't say PMO. They saw it as a magic solution to their problems, and they had such severe problems. I don't think that a program office was going to help them with that.
Some expectation management.
Some expectations management, yes.
And finally, let me see if I get it right this time. Pacific Electric and Gas.
Pacific Gas and Electric Gas. Close enough.
So what would you have done differently there?
That one actually went pretty well. We had a strong, dedicated team. We had upper management support. That one actually got implemented fairly well. So, but again, that was a very tactical PMO.
All right. Now, from here, where do you see PMOs going in the next few years? What's coming down the road for PMOs?
You know, I've seen a lot of PMOs fail. Somebody in a company says, we have to have a PMO, but they really don't understand what the PMO can benefit them. It's like they read an airline magazine and say, oh, this is the next hot thing, we have to do this. A PMO can provide tremendous benefits, but you have to know what those benefits are, and you have to be willing to make the appropriate changes to do that. I think a lot of the PMOs now are very tactical. They're very short-term focused, and it's like, let's improve how we do projects. I think PMOs are going to go the same way that entire IT organizations are going to go in the future. They have to show strategic value to the organization.
Yes.
They have to show long-term value, and that leads to a different PMO than a short tactical PMO. So I think that's the direction they're going in.
All right. Now, one thing that we have for our listeners is you have actually written a white paper or a case study, it is, on the Toyota PMO.
Yes.
And anyone who wants to get that paper, what email address can they get you at?
fparth@projectauditors.com.
All right, and of course I'll put that email address up on my blog as well. Now let's come back to project auditors. Let's say someone out there is in need of setting up PMO. How can you help them?
Oh, absolutely. We can come in, we can do an assessment of the organization, show what the benefits of a PMO are, and help them. We can either design it for them with people in the organization, or we can support their own design. And again, we'd be happy if you hired us for 6 or 12 or 18 months to do all the work for you, but we think it's more beneficial if you do the work yourself with our support. We're actually doing that right now with another company. We help design their project management processes. Effectively, they have a PMO, though we're not calling it that. And we're supporting their project manager as needed as they roll all this out step by step by step. So.
And of course, the URL is www.projectauditors.com, right?
Yes, all one word. Yes, sir.
All one word. Wonderful. Okay. Now, let's move over to the final 10. These are my 10 questions that I like to ask at the end of each of these interviews here. So let's go. Number 1, what was your favorite project in your career?
Oh, wow. That was probably the satellite project I worked on for Martin Marietta. That was a lot of fun. As a project manager, I get to work with hardware and see it all come together, and that really was a lot of fun. I did some work at Experian, which we used to be TRW Information Systems, and they were doing a massive infrastructure upgrade. And I worked on that project very heavily as the lead systems engineer. So that was a lot of fun also.
Number 2, what project would you like to have managed?
You know, I'd never thought about that before before you asked me about it. I'm going to say NASA's Apollo program.
Oh, interesting.
That would have been a real gas to work on.
Quite challenging. Number 3, what is your favorite project management book?
Well, to show my support for PMI, I'm going to say the PMBOK. I really like the Meredith and Mantle book, Project Management, A Managerial Approach. It's very good reading. It has a lot of good things in there, and I often recommend it. But that's going to change because Cindy Snyder and I have co-authored a book on IT project management that's going to be published this year. So that's going to become my favorite project management book.
Absolutely understandable. Number 4, what is the topic of the next seminar that you're planning to attend?
Well, Cornelius, there's so much to learn in project management. I don't pick my seminars by what's coming up next. I pick my seminars by what I have time to go listen to. I'm giving a paper at the European Convention in Madrid in May, and I plan on attending as many of those seminars as I absolutely can.
As you possibly can.
Yes.
All right. What is the paper about?
It is actually about how to project manage a business improvement project.
Question number 5. What is the best way to make a project fail?
And 2 answers come to mind. The first one is to not gather your requirements thoroughly. And the second one is not getting the right executive level sponsorship.
Number 6. How do you like to celebrate a successful project?
I try and give out team awards if I possibly can. And if it's a small team, I'll just take them and their spouses out to dinner. Otherwise, I'll throw a party and beer and pizza and whatever works.
Okay. Number 7. In your projects, where do you focus most of your attention in order to be successful?
Well, there's one thing about being a project manager. If the project fails, it's your fault. If the project is successful, it's because the team made it successful. And so after the planning phase of the project, all my attention is on the team and what they need to be successful.
Whatever it takes, right?
Whatever it takes, right.
Number 8. If you weren't a project manager, what would you like to be?
I think I'd enjoy being a ship captain on one of those old wooden sailing ships, those 3-masted square rig sailing ships.
Yes, and of course at this point I have to mention, fellow listeners, that here in the back we have a model of a ship which Frank is obviously working on.
Actually, we have worse than that. We have a 30-foot sailboat right next to the garage.
Okay, I haven't seen that. Number 9. What is the one thing that a project manager cannot live without?
An understanding spouse.
Oh!
Because let's face it, it's stressful work.
Yes, it is.
And you have to have family support along with everything else.
Yeah, and finally, the oldest question in project management. What is more important to a project manager? Project management expertise or industry expertise?
You're trying to trap me, aren't you?
Yes, of course, always.
Well, without project management training and expertise, you don't know what to do and you don't know what to do next.
Yes.
But without industry expertise, you don't understand what your team is doing. And where the risks are, what needs to be done to avoid the risks and manage the project effectively in the future. If I have 20 years managing construction projects, do you really want me taking over your pharmaceutical development? I don't think so. So I'm going to sneak out of this question and I'm going to say you need both equally.
Both equally. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Cornelius.
And to finish up today's interview, let me take you to a news item which I found this week. It is titled Reality of PMOs Study, Interim Results Released. The University of Quebec Business School, they did this reality of PMO studies, and they have surveyed 500 PMOs between March and November of 2005. And the 2 most significant overall findings are, number 1, there is a great variety and lack of consensus on the value of PMOs, the structure of PMOs, and the functions included in their mandates. Number 2, although the original survey measured several characteristics of the organizational context of these PMOs that they surveyed, these were insufficient to explain the variations in PMOs that they found. They found no systematic or significant variation across geographic regions or economic sectors. There is more variation within regions and economic sectors than across them. And also the size of the organization, and whether it is in the private or the public sector, also failed to show why these PMOs are so different. Well, This simply means to me that I have been right all along. I've always said that a PMO is something different to everyone among us. Well, that's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. Next week, I'm not quite certain yet what you're going to hear. Either we will be talking about change management or communication. We'll see. As always, you can find us on the web at pmpodcast.blogspot.com, or you can send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com. And when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. If at first you don't succeed in your project, then remove all evidence that you ever tried. With that, until next time.